So welcome to the session on the CSS frameworks course and course assignment. And we're also going to be talking about making pull requests and a little bit of managing branches too. So I'm going to sort of run through this content very, very quickly. And the only reason I'm going to run through it is to show you how branching is going to work during this process and how you're going to be using commits. I'm not going to be doing a perfect, I'm not going to be building anything. I'll just do the setup stage of this module. And then we'll take a look at GitHub and we will go through the process of creating a pull request. I see that Jan is here, so maybe we can we can do a pull request between us two to show you how it works with two people. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new repository. Okay, so you can do this on the command line or in Visual Studio Code first if you prefer. But I think it's going to be easiest if you start here in GitHub and create a new remote repository. So I'm going to call this CSS frameworks example. And I'm going to keep it public. If you set it to private, you will have to invite everyone who's going to review your project to the repository. So it's much better to keep it public because you're going to be getting a review from teachers and you're also going to be getting a review from your fellow students. I'm going to ignore everything else in these settings. It's not dangerous or anything. Like you could add a README, you could add a git ignore, but I'm going to leave that for now and just create a blank repository. Okay, so I find it easiest to use the GitHub desktop client. So I'm just going to click that and I'm going to select an appropriate place to put it. So I've got Noroff and I've got demos and I'm going to create a new folder and say October 21. And we can save the repository to that location. And now the quickest way to get started is to use this shortcut here, which for a Mac is Option-Shift-A. I don't know what it is for Windows, and you also have this button here. So I'm going to click on that button, and that has opened up my repository, and I can check in here. I might say, well, I can look in source control and see if I have branches, create a new branch, etc. But I'm in the right place. I have an empty project. And I can see down at the bottom, I'm in the master branch as well. So the first thing we need to do, if we look at the lessons, if we're going to be using Sass and Bootstrap, then we need a package.json file. So that's probably the first thing that we're going to want to do. And I'm not going to use this shortcut here. The shortcut just means yes, as in answer yes to every single question. I'm going to do it the slow way, and I'll make this a bit bigger as well. Not quite that big. Okay. So it's going to ask a series of questions. What's the package name? I'm going to say CSS Frameworks. The version I would put as 0.01 because development has only just begun and there's currently no code in here at all. So a 1.00 is a finished product and a 0.01 is the very, very start of the project. And you'll learn in later courses how this number goes up over time and when it's going to go up. But for now, this is as much as you need to worry about it. Description, it's optional, but you could put a social media application written with Bootstrap. Entry point is not relevant to us, so we can ignore it. I'm just going to hit enter. Test command is also not relevant to us, so I'm going to ignore that too. The Git repository is the one that I just created, and that looks correct to me, so I'm going to accept. And here I might say CSS frameworks Bootstrap, just as a few keywords. The author is your name followed by your email address, and you put your email address inside these square brackets. The license, we're not going to worry about the license. That is more important when you're producing software that lots of other people are going to use. So for example, if you made a little tool that lots of people find useful, then the license for that tool is very important. But since this is just a school project, we're not worried about it at this point. So we can see a preview of how our package.json file is going to look, and I'm okay with that. So I'm going to say yes, I'm okay. And we can see here that we've got one change now. If we go to the File Explorer, we've got a green file called package.json. And in the change section, we've got one new file called package.json. And if we look at this, it's got all of the data that we just answered questions on. So we can add that, and I'm just going to say initial commit, and I'm going to publish. Can't find master because I didn't actually set up a branch. All right, so when I was creating the repo, I should have actually created at least one file just to sort of get it ready. So that was a little bit stupid of me. It's basically saying that I have a different name of the branch on okay, so I've got one file now. I should be able to pull that file down, but now I've got different heads. Okay. All right, I'm actually going to clone that again because that's confusing and I did it wrong. So I want to so I'm just going to remove it from GitHub Desktop, and I'm going to get it again. That'll sort of reset my status and avoid any issues. So if you do have problems like that, it's a quick way to reset your repo, remove it from GitHub Desktop. All of the files will be stored on GitHub anyway. Just make sure you don't have anything local that you haven't saved. So here I am in my blank project again. I'm going to do the exact same process, but quicker. So npm init 0.01. Okay. And now I can add that, and I'll say initializes npm, because that's technically what we've done here. And I'll push that just to check that everything is working between the local and the remote repo. If I go in here and refresh, now I have my package file. So this is the sort of absolute bare minimum for any project, is a git ignore file with this node modules folder ignored, and a package.json file. This is the fundamental building block of every npm project. So you'll see these two files in 100% of your future projects. Now that we have our package file, we can do stuff like installing other libraries. So the first one to install might be Bootstrap. So I'm going to type npm install Bootstrap. And now you can see that I have a new folder. It's installed Bootstrap, and it's also installed Popper, which is a dependency of Bootstrap. Bootstrap needs Popper to run. So even though we haven't asked for Popper, we have to have it in our project in order for Bootstrap to run. And this is exactly the task that npm is handling for us. It's keeping track of all of these different folders for us so that we don't have to remember and juggle all of these things for ourselves. So it's a tool to make life easier. It's not meant to make things more complicated. So now we have this package. We can look inside it and see what it's made out of, and it's made out of JavaScript and CSS, which is not that surprising. And we can just reference these files directly. So if I create an HTML file, I could just say, like, put a link in here and change this to node modules and bootstrap and dist CSS and bootstrap.min.css, like that. That works, but this doesn't give me any opportunity to customize Bootstrap. So if I'm doing this, I'm just saying I want the default color for everything. I want the default spacing. I want the default border radius. I don't want to make this look at all like it's my own project. I just want it to look like every other Bootstrap project in the world, which is not good enough for the CA. So the CA, the CA expects you to go the next step and to, sorry, I'm losing my voice, to go the next step and to customize Bootstrap deeply. And in order to customize it deeply, we have to use Sass. So that's the next thing to install. And because the user of our website doesn't need Sass, they're just going to see normal CSS. The developer is the only person who needs Sass. So whilst I'm working on this project, I need Sass to turn my SCSS files into CSS files, but the user doesn't need that ability. So it wouldn't really make sense to package everything up in the same place and give it to the user, because then they're going to have to download so much extra code for no reason. So that's why we separate our dependencies into regular dependencies that the user is going to receive, and dev dependencies that are only used for the developer to speed up their process or to improve their process. And Sass is one of these tools. So when I'm typing npm install, I'm also going to use the flag save dev and say Sass. And if we look at the package file now, we've got one dependency, and that's Bootstrap 5.2. And we have one dev dependency, and that's Sass 1.5. So at this point, we have everything we need to work with Bootstrap on a quite deep level. I'm just going to update these scripts here. So I need a script that's going to build, as in it's going to convert Sass or SCSS files into CSS files. That's the job of the build script, because the user's browser can only view regular CSS. And the way that the Sass command works is that you have an input file or folder, and you have an output folder. And there's a colon separating these two. So if we look at our project, we don't actually have any Sass files at the moment. So it's not really clear what our input is, and it's also not very clear what our output's going to be either. So if we're trying to write this script now, we don't really know where to point it. So for now, I'm going to put that back, and I'm going to commit the changes I've got. In fact, I should be doing this on a branch, and last time I did this demo, I didn't do it on a branch. So this is a good time to stop. So if we look at the repo, we only have these two files, and if we look at the project, we've got 3 additional files, or actually more than that, but we're not tracking these. So before I continue, I'm going to create a new branch, and I'm going to call this, so we need a branch called CSS Frameworks. That's going to be the submission branch. And we also need, well, we could do everything in this branch now, or we could make a smaller branch for a more specific thing. So I'm just going to say SAS setup here. So now we're in a branch called SAS setup, and I'm going to commit all of these changes, or just these two actually, because these both relate to installing Bootstrap and SAS. So my message is going to be installs Bootstrap and SAS. And this file, I haven't really done anything with it yet, so there's no need to commit it. Maybe I can commit it and say add empty HTML file and publish that branch. And we can check that that worked, because we can come in here and see that we now have 3 branches. One of them is called SAS setup, and if we click on that one, we see the extra files. And if we go back to the home page, if we go back to the master branch, we only have the two files, and we go back and we have the 4 files. So this is the purpose of branching. It's to save your position. Maybe you finished something, everything's working really nicely, and you're about to take a step into the unknown and do something that you're not familiar with, and you're not sure if it's going to work. If you ever have that feeling, the best thing to do is commit everything you've done so far, create a new branch, and go wild. Try it out, do whatever changes you're planning to do, and if it breaks the application, you can always go back to your original branch. That's one of the safety nets that this provides you. It's not, we use it for a very good reason. It's to help us with our own mistakes and to help us protect work that has been finished. Okay, so we still don't have a SAS file, so I'm going to create that. And I'm going to put this inside source, which is our source code, i.e. our code that has not been built. This is conventional, and it's also conventional to name folders after the resource that they hold. So in this case, I'm going to be using .scss files. So I'm calling my folder scss, and I'm going to have styles.scss in here. So here's our empty style sheet, and I'm going to commit that as well and say adds empty SAS file or SCSS file. If anyone else is confused about SAS and SCSS, me too. It really irritates me that there are 2 different names for the same project. They're not exactly the same thing, but that makes it worse. So we have our file, and this is our target. So we now know what our input directory is. It's source/scss, i.e. that's the folder we want to watch over. So if I put in build, which is what we were going to call the script, and it's going to be SAS, the first argument is going to be source SCSS, like that, and then a colon to separate the input and the output folder. And then we can name our output folder. So it's normal to have this called dist, as in distribution, because this is code that you intend to distribute to your users. It's not your source code. Your source code is only meant to be consumed by other developers. Your distribution code is what the user is going to be using. So we could just use that, and I'll show you what that does. So if I go into the terminal, I need to run this command from the terminal, and I run it with npm run build. And you see that this dist folder has been created, and there's 2 files. One of them is a style sheet, one of them is a map of a style sheet, which we don't need to worry about. And there's nothing in here because there's nothing in here. If I say tests display none, and then I run this again, we have the matching CSS. Maybe I can try test nest, and run it again. And we can see how it's taken the SCSS features of nesting and it's applied those to plain CSS, which is the only job that the Sass script has. So we could leave it there, but there's a slightly better place that we can use as our destination folder or our output folder, which would be dist CSS, so that we have the same clarity about what each folder is going to contain as we've got in our source folder. And if I run this again, now I can delete these because I don't need them anymore, and we have dist/CSS, and our styles are located at that position. So if we go to our index file, we can refer to those with a link, and the address is going to be dist css styles.css. Yeah, I got you. So this bugs here is if let's say you finished your project and I am looking at your project as like another developer and I find a problem with it, maybe something's not working correctly, I can use this link to tell you about it. So I can say new issue, the title is the wrong color, or maybe the app doesn't load on iOS, something like that. And then you would include some detail. Hey, I was trying to use this app on iOS and it doesn't load. And you'd submit a new issue. Hopefully you'd be a bit more detailed than that. This is just an example. It's good to give as much detail as possible to help the developer fix your issue. And I then get an email saying that someone has created an issue, and it's up to me to respond to this issue, to fix the issue, and let the person know who raised it. So this is just a standardized way to manage complaints or things that aren't working properly in an application. And it is considered very helpful to create issues with other people's work. So it might sound like a nasty thing to do. But if you have a software package, you need other people to help you with it, because especially if it's big, the code gets too much to handle for one person. So if you're working on a big project, if someone opens an issue, they're actually doing you a big favor because they're pointing you straight towards something you need to fix. So this will become more familiar as the course goes on, but there's no reason not to use this straight away, especially if you're reviewing someone else's work. So if a friend or another student sends you their repo and says, hey, can you take a look at this? And you start finding lots of issues, this is the best place to put them. So there's a permanent record and the repository owner can resolve them. Can you please repeat how you installed Sass, save dev? Yep, sure. So to do that, I'll uninstall everything. Before I do that, I'll commit. So I'm going to call this commit adds styles. And then I'm going to undo the installs that I did earlier. So npm uninstall bootstrap and npm uninstall Sass. And now if I check the package.json file, I have no dependencies and no dev dependencies. So we're back to where we were before. And to install them again, so the normal way, like for Bootstrap, is just an npm install and then the name of the package. And then if you want to save a dev dependency, there's two ways to do it. You can say npm install and then -- save dev, as in save dev dependencies is kind of what that's short for. So npm install save dev and then the name of the package, which is sass, or there is actually a shortcut. So this is what I would do if I was not doing a demonstration. I would say npm I hyphen capital D sass, and that does the exact same thing. It's just a shorter way of writing the same command, and it's very common for these flags to have a shortcut version. So hopefully that has answered that question. In terms of the why, you will cover the why of why we do this a bit later on in workflow. So for now, you just need to know the how, and then you'll get to the theory a little bit later on. All right, so we've got Sass set up, but we don't have Bootstrap set up. The best way to do that is to import it into our main style sheet or our main SCSS file. So we can do that with import, and then we need to find the path to node modules. And then we need to find Bootstrap, and within Bootstrap we have a folder called SCSS, just like we have in our own project, which is why, not why, but partly why we called it that. And then we can go all the way down here, and we're looking for the plain bootstrap.scss file. And I'm going to save that, and I'm going to build again, npm run build. And it's taking a little longer this time because if we look, we now have all of the Bootstrap code, and it's very large. So that has covered that's covered just setting up default theme Bootstrap. If we view our file now in live server, there's nothing here, but I can say button and then give it a Bootstrap button class. And that is very obviously a Bootstrap button. It's not a default styled button, which would look like this. So we know that Bootstrap is working on our page. We haven't overridden it yet, so let's do that. So we could just start typing variables into this main file, but it's nicer to keep things organized. So I'm going to create a new file called variables. And the reason I'm calling it this is because if we go to node modules and we take a look at Bootstrap and how they've organized their stuff, they also have a file called variables. And if we click on this, it contains all of the things that we can override. Most of the important ones are at the top, but depending on what you're trying to do, you might want to dig deeper. Almost everything can be customized, and there's actually some really cool stuff. So gradients, so enable gradients, that can be quite fun. And CSS grid is also can be interesting to play around with. So there are some features in here that that are sort of experimental, or they're not part of Bootstrap by default, that you can turn on or off. There are stuff like this is spaces. So if you're not happy with the way that like margins and padding is calculated, you can change these values here, and that will change the like that'll change like M1, M2, or like PT3. Those kind of classes are all controlled by this little block here. So I'm just going to grab a few things to override, like this, and I'll also take the color palette. So now I have my own file with my own variables, And this gives me an opportunity to change the values and for Bootstrap to use those new values. So I have to do a few things. I have to get rid of all of these default flags because we don't want those. This one too, and this one. And now for colors, I'm just gonna change the tone of all the colors. Um, just as a quick example. But I would hope that for your project you spend some time sort of thinking carefully about the color scheme you want to use and making sure the colors work together nicely and not just picking them at random like I'm doing. Because this is your opportunity to get things looking how you want exactly. I'm not very likely to make something that looks good. And then in our styles file, we need to reference these variables. And we could reference it like this, because that is, we can see here, that's the full name of the file. But this underscore can actually be excluded, and the SCSS file extension can also be excluded. So if we really want to keep it nice and sort of neat, then I can import like that, and that is exactly the same thing as importing like this. It's just that the language is prepared to assume that this is going to be an SCSS file for us. So we can keep that as is. And now I'm going to run build again, npm run build. And if we go back to our application, we can see that the color of the green has changed slightly. If I get rid of this, so take a mental note of this green shade, and then we'll build again and refresh, and it's become lighter. Maybe that's not the most obvious thing in the world, so I'll change this to like something weird. That didn't work. Oh, right here. And one thing I'm forgetting to do is forgetting to run this build command. So at the moment, every time I make a change, I have to run this command again, which is quite annoying, especially when we want to be working quite fast. So what we do to get around that is we can go into the scripts section, and underneath build, we can add a new one, and we can call this watch, and we're going to say Sass watch, and then give it the same data there. So instead of just building once, now Sass is going to watch for any changes, and as soon as a change is made, it will recompile the SCSS for us. So we're currently blue, and I'm saving, and now we're green. And I didn't do it. I didn't have to run that command in between. So that's the benefit of using the watch flag. And then there's one more thing we can do to sort of superpower this package.json file, and that's with another extension. So far I've been using the live server extension, which is great for me because I have that installed on my computer, but I don't know whether every other person in the world is going to have that installed on their computer. And I want my project to be usable by as many people as possible. So instead of relying on an extension to do this, maybe we could have used an extension to do the Sass thing too. It's better to put this configuration in your project. And the place to put configuration is inside the package.json file. So what I've suggested in the lesson, and this is optional, is to add live server as a dev dependency. and that means that we can attach live server to our watch script, and that will just run everything for us in one go. Um, so we have live server there, and now I'm going to say live server in there, and that's all we have to do. And now if I run npm run watch, not only is it going to build the SaaS for us, but it's also going to open the live server at the same time. So this is just a useful thing to run whilst you're developing. And if we go back to 100%, in terms of like how to test, like if you're trying to create a Bootstrap theme and you're not really sure, what colors you want to use or what values you want to use, the site I would recommend is called bootstrap.build. This is a visual theme builder for Bootstrap, and it gives you access to all of the variables. So everything in this right-hand sidebar is a group of variables, and you can change all of the values in here. So for example, color system, if I want white to be a shade of red, then I get to see how that looks straight away. Not very good, but it's just the start of my theme. So this is a really useful page to test out your theme, especially if you go into DevTools and you steal it. So I'm gonna copy out to HTML, and then I'm gonna put that in my HTML doc. And now I have a really nice testing suite. So I can start working locally on my project, and I can see all of my theme colors being applied to this as I go. So this is a really nice way to just make sure that your content is looking good and that you've actually covered all of the various components that Bootstrap comes with. Sometimes you don't even know it exists until you see it laid out like this. I do see some of these that don't seem to have worked. I'm not sure why. Okay, well, boohoo. So that is a good thing to test with, and maybe it's a good idea to call that file like tests.html. Just to make it clear that it's not your actual content, and if you are submitting, you shouldn't submit this along with your final files. All right, so if we check changes now, I'm actually going to keep this as my index because I'm going to pretend that that's my real project. So package, we installed live server and updated the watch script, or created the watch script. So my message is going to be installs live server and updates and adds watch script. And then here we have adds bootstrap theme. I suppose those were. And then this one is just adding test content. Okay, so that actually covers like the whole of module 1 in a very, very very surface level way, like without getting too deep into Bootstrap components or the ins and outs of customizing. That is how you do it, sort of broadly speaking. And if we go back to the repository and we take a look at our branches page, we can see that the SaaS setup branch has got 8 commits ahead of master, i.e. there are 8 changes in this branch that don't exist in the master branch. So what we need to do to change that is we need to create a pull request. And I actually don't want to, I want to make my pull request into CSS frameworks because this is the branch that you're going to be putting all of your work into. And then when you're submitting, you're going to be submitting your pull request from CSS frameworks into main, and I'll get there in a second. So this is Sass setup, installs Sass, does basic bootstrap customization, and includes a watch script to run the project. It's nice to be detailed with these, but if you're the only person looking at it, then maybe you don't need to get into too much detail. And this is what a pull request looks like. So there's these 4 tabs. You don't really need to worry about this one or this one so much, but you've got files changed. And if we click on this, we'll see a diagram of every change that we've made. So these are all the 8 commits that we've made. And this is the state that this file was in before, and this is the state that this file is in now. So the purpose of this pull request is that at this point, having opened it, you would send it to someone else, and that other person is going to review it. The reason we send it to someone else is that when we finish work, we think we are finished, but we may not actually be finished. And only someone else can tell us whether we're really finished or not sometimes. Like, even if we're 100% sure, having someone else to like confirm it and say, yes, I agree, is really important in the world of development, because this stops, sorry about the ringing if you can hear that. This stops us from accidentally adding errors or mistakes that might be dangerous. And a good example of this is it was about 3 years ago. The company called Cloudflare, which is a really important networking company that a lot of internet services rely on, they had an intern. The intern wrote a piece of code that was maybe like 6 characters of code, and it brought down the whole internet and cost billions of dollars of damage in lost services. The reason it brought down the internet is because he made a mistake, which is fair enough. Everyone makes mistakes. But then he sent it for a review, and the person who was supposed to review it didn't review it, and they just said, okay, thumbs up, it's good to go. And it went onto a live system, and it caused huge amounts of damage. And in this situation, whose fault is that? It's actually not the developer's fault. The developer he did not get fired, he did not get a pay cut, he was not reprimanded in any way. The person whose fault it is the person who approved the change, because their job is to look at the work that's been done carefully and say, I think this is good to go, or this still needs some work before we're there. So that's what this process is all about. And when you pass your code to someone else for a review, you're also passing a little bit of the responsibility for that code, which if you are very worried about something not working, then now there's 2 people involved, and there's 2 people who have had a look and have validated the code. And if it's still not working after that, it's not just you, it's not just you that's getting it wrong, it's you and someone else. So that can be quite comforting. If you have a very experienced reviewer, they will give you really useful feedback that will make your code better and make you better as a developer. If you have someone who's not very interested, they might write 1 or 2 sentences and say, yeah, cool, all good. But the intention of the system is to provide detailed feedback. And this is how it looks for us as well when we're reviewing your work. So I come in here, I take a look through the files, and I look for something that might be wrong. In this case, there's not actually that much to sort of look at, but maybe I say, oh wait, space is 1. Wasn't that supposed to be 2? Didn't we change that earlier to 2? I thought I said that I wanted that to be double. So I would make a suggestion, and I would say, hey, I thought this was meant to be 2. Did you change your mind? And here I'm talking to myself, which is a bit crazy, but imagine I'm talking to someone else. Start a review, and maybe I come up and say, um, we're also going to need x.scss file, some other SCSS file that hasn't been included to create the theme. So these are just the sort of example comments you might make on a pull request, and you make them at the point of the code that they're relevant to, so that it's easy to find where to change. And then those are my only two comments. So I'm going to finish my review, and I'm going to request changes. Okay, I can't actually do that because it's my own repo, but in this situation, I would click request changes and say, this is good, but we need a couple more things. Submit review. Now, if this was your repository, you would have an email, and the email would contain my review and would have a link for you to come here and check my comments. Then you would come in here and say, nah, it was always one, you are wrong, one is best, comment. So that is an example of rejecting a suggestion. In this case, the person suggesting is wrong. It happens. So I don't want to do anything. I don't want to commit the suggestion. So I'm just going to hit resolve and ignore that. And then here, oh yeah, we need to add x.scss. So in this situation, I would go back to my code and I would go to that file and import x.scss, which doesn't exist or do anything. I'll just create it here just so it doesn't throw an error. And now I can update this, and we should see that the pull request has been updated. So if we go back to the files changed here, and we go over here, we can see that we've got this new code that we just added. This conversation has been satisfied. Yeah, I forgot about that. Thanks. Added now. And I've resolved the conversation. So I have responded to all of the feedback. Oh, okay, I see I've had a comment here. Yep. I'm just going to see what that green looks like in my browser. That's lovely. That's a lovely green, in my opinion. So I'm going to say awesome green, 10 out of 10. Add a single comment. And I want to automatically apply that change. So I'm happy with the change that Jan has suggested. So changes the shade of green. Commit changes. And now this pull request has been updated with that suggestion. And the green has changed. So this is a process. It won't be a case of like asking for a review and then getting the review back and that being the end of the process. As this tab suggests, it is a conversation. It's a back and forth. So it might be that I say, or your reviewer says, there's an issue here, please fix this. And then you come back and say, okay, cool, it's fixed. And then they say, no, it's not actually quite fixed. You still need to do this. And it can be that kind of process. It's not just like a once off type thing. So now I've been through all the comments and there's nothing to resolve. So I'm going to merge this. And what I'm merging it from the SAS setup branch into my CSS frameworks branch. I'm going to delete this branch because I don't need it anymore. And if I go back to the branches menu, I have two branches, and one of them is called CSS Frameworks, one of them is called Master. And let's just do some So now I'm going to change to the CSS frameworks branch, and you can see there's 11 changes that I need to pull to update my local repository. So I'm going to do that first. And I will put some new content into this file. Nothing very exciting, but I now have new changes, and I could commit them directly to this branch, but it's better if I create a new branch and say style changes and updates styles, and save changes. Do I? Oh. Okay, so update styles, publish branch. And let's say that this represents like a lot of work. So I've made like 200 styles here. It's the end of a session. I've been working for a long time, and I'm happy with what I've done. And it's time to merge it back into the main CSS frameworks branch because I'm finished with this particular task. So we do the same thing. Style changes, we create a pull request, and we choose CSS frameworks branch as the target, and we create that, and we go through the same process, reviewing the files that have changed, trying to catch any mistakes we might have made, maybe asking for feedback if it's particularly important or there's something that you need help with. Once all of this has been resolved, you merge, you delete your branch, and once again, this CSS frameworks branch has been updated, and we can check that that's the case by going in here, and we see our empty space and our style. So you may have 3 or 4 branches, you may have 6 or 7, you may have 60 or 90 or 150. It's up to you how many branches you create and what sort of they contain. Some people like to make lots of small branches and keep them very, very specific. Some people like to have a broader branch name and do more tasks in each branch. You will get a feel for what works for you, but there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer here. As long as you use at least one branch, i.e. CSS frameworks branch, you're fine. You don't need to use any more than those 2 to complete this assignment. It can be a good idea to use more is really what I'm saying. And assuming that your project is done, so this project is very far from done, but we're just going to pretend that this is a finished project. So in order to finish and submit and deliver this, what you're going to be doing is creating a pull request into master from CSS frameworks containing all of your changes. So all of the work you're going to do for the CA is going to be contained in here, in files changed. This is what the teacher is going to review. So this is, when you get to this point, you should be confident that you have completed the assignment, that you've got all the features in place. And when you go for a review, a good review should be a teacher saying, great, you're going to pass, there's nothing that needs to be changed. It's more likely that the teacher will say, this thing's not quite right, or that thing's not quite right. Please go and spend 15 minutes changing it and come back to me. If you're getting a review and you still have unfinished pages or you still have stuff missing and you don't need to be told what's missing, then it might be better to spend that time working on the project. If you have got all your stuff in place and you just want to make sure that you're going to pass, then make sure that you submit this PR for review. I know it's kind of confusing. It's a new system, but this is the same system you're going to be using when you work as a developer. And it's a system where a lot of thought and effort has been put into streamlining it and making it useful. So for us to use a different system would be kind of weird because this thing exists already. So we are going to be using it for all future assessments. This screen is going to become very, very familiar to you, and it will continue being familiar to you afterwards in your working life as well. One thing I will say about the assignment is that it is pass-fail. So there is a list of features that need to be in your project. And if one of these features is not in the project, you will not pass. They're not all difficult things to achieve. So some of them can take only a few minutes to include in your project. Some of them take maybe an hour or two to include properly. But the goal here is not to catch you out or to make as many people fail as possible. The goal is to switch you over to the workplace way of thinking. Imagine you're at your job and your boss has asked you to move a car from A to B, and you get in the car and you drive 40% of the distance, and then you get out of the car and you call your boss and you say you're finished. It's never going to fly. And in year one, that's how the assessments were being done. And that's because we want to introduce concepts to you without too much pressure. But in year two, it's important that you are achieving all of the things we've asked you to. And that's so that we can say as teachers that we're confident in your ability to do each subject. In the working world, there's no opportunity to do less than 100%. You might be given more time, and we have an ability to provide extensions if there's something going on in your personal life that's affecting your schoolwork, for example. A boss will often do the same thing for you. But in terms of not delivering, that just doesn't match up with reality. So this is why we've changed over to the system, and to accommodate for the fact that there is more to keep track of. This is why we're doing the reviews, because we're going to help you make sure that you've ticked all the boxes by giving you this review before you deliver your work, and going through and saying, okay, I think that you need to do this, otherwise you might not pass, or saying everything's sorted, it's all good, you're ready for delivery. So this is like an extra layer of protection for you. If you don't submit for a review, you won't get a review either. So the last thing I'm going to do before I open to questions is show you how to assign a reviewer. So in my case, Jan is going to be reviewing my work from the teaching staff. I don't know how many A's you have in your username there. All right, so I need to add Jan as a collaborator. There we go. Invite collaborator. And he will need to now accept that invitation. So I suggest doing this quite early on. As soon as you've created your repository that you're going to be using for your CA, I would suggest coming in here and adding teachers as collaborators, just so that you don't forget to do that later on. Okay, so that's now been accepted, and I can come in here into the pull requests, and I can request a review from Jan. So now he appears as a reviewer, he gets an email, and this is how we track the requests. So we review these in the order that these are requested. So if you've finished the CA early, you've done it really quickly, and you're 10 days away from the deadline, If you put your review in, you'll probably get your review first. If you are waiting until right before the deadline, there's a chance that you might not get your review because we will already be busy reviewing other people's. So it is first come, first served. We do try to get to everyone, but if they come in earlier, we have a better chance to process them all. So um, that's um, that's this process sort of laid out, and this is what you will then submit. So this link is what you'll be delivering. So you don't need to do anything with this. You don't need to merge it. You don't need to close it. Just open it up and leave it be, and it will be reviewed. You can make your changes, and at the end of the process, the teacher will close this pull request. So it's actually up to Jan to merge this, not up to me. I've done my bit by providing the code. It's now up to him to review, to make sure it's up to scratch, and then to press the button. All right, so that was quite a lot of information. I do promise that this process is going to become like second nature to you eventually. The first time is going to be a bit difficult, but there's not that big a sort of cost to these things. So if you need to create loads of branches and sort of create your own little mini pull request just to get your head around this, that's fine. Yeah, this system is basically meant to allow you to divide sessions up, or to divide your work up by concept. And that is very useful. That helps us organize ourselves a lot instead of just doing everything in one big session. Okay, question about Bootstrap 12 column grids. The container for row column has a start end margin that seems to be impossible to change. Is there any way to override this using CSS? Let me just replicate that quickly. So we've got a container, a row, a column. So div container, div row, div column. Right, and it's invisible because, of course, it is. There we go. So we're talking about the gutter in the row. So the container width can be changed. So the orange space that we can see on either side, that can be changed. The row, maybe I'll have two columns instead. So are we talking about the gutter here, the 1.5 rem gutter, margin top, margin right, margin left? Because these are controllable by variables. So I can actually change this to affect that, and that also has an SCSS counterpart. So if I go to the original variables file, we're looking for gutter, and you can see here that the gutter width by default is 1.5, which is the same value as this here. So if we go to our own variables file, I can set this up, and I can say 0.5 instead, and that value has been changed. So somehow this script does not watch my SAS file and compile it when saving. However, the build script works. What am I doing wrong? Um, it doesn't look like you're doing anything wrong. That looks pretty much how it should be. I assume that oh yeah, if the build command works, then you have a file at the right location. Um, when you say nothing happens, do you mean the screen doesn't update? Because you can check if the CSS is updating by looking at the file, the CSS file. Okay. Right. So like you're not getting this readout here. I'm not sure exactly. I think I would probably need to take a look at your projects and run it myself to debug that. It looks like you have everything set up pretty much correctly, so I don't have an obvious answer for you. I installed SAS in my repo and followed the instructions, but could not run SAS. I got Z shell command not found SAS. What have I done wrong? It's possible that you're trying to run SAS directly from the command line. So I can do that here to show you. Um, so if I try to type SAS straight into the command line, I'm going to get, oh, that actually did work. I didn't really expect it to work. Um, is that the context, or are you running it like npm run build? Okay, so yeah, the purpose of the script section is to communicate with your node modules, if that makes sense. So everything has to be written into a script like that, like inside package.json. This section here, this is where we talk directly to the command line. And you can do some stuff outside, like I could do npx sas. I think that would probably work. Yep. So that works if you type npx beforehand, but it's actually a safety mechanism. Um, the reason it doesn't do that automatically is a safety mechanism. It's kind of complicated as to why or what's going on, but if you want something to run, the best place to run it is from your package.json file in the script section. So the live server, do you need it when VS Code has one installed by default? Um, it's optional, and I'm keeping it optional. I like to include it in my package just because there's a chance that someone else might not be using VS Code. So if we make assumptions based on what's in VS Code, we are effectively creating a new dependency of our project. We're saying that our project depends on VS Code, and that's not actually written down anywhere. So if someone was to just pluck this out of the internet at random and try and use it, they wouldn't necessarily know that VS Code is the most popular IDE. They wouldn't necessarily know that VS Code has these features built in. And it's more about being super, super like declarative about what our project requires. So it's good hygiene, but it's optional. So regarding the CA, are we allowed to customize Bootstrap with SCSS, or are we only allowed to use Bootstrap uncustomized? You will not pass this assessment if you do not customize Bootstrap. It is a requirement. It's a hard requirement. You must use SCSS to customize. So to unlock the full potential of your variables file, take a copy of Bootstrap's version of the same file and make sure to import Bootstrap's SAS functions. Can I elaborate on this? Yeah, that's a good question. I actually meant to talk about that. So I'm going to get rid of all of the files that are not variables because we don't really need any of those. Okay. So what I was suggesting there is you can either cherry pick, which is what I did here. I cherry picked variables that might be interesting to me. But if you want to go for like a total overhaul of Bootstrap where you really want to get like into it and change everything or change lots of deeper settings that are generally ignored, copying and pasting this and removing a few of these is not actually going to work. It's going to create an error. So if I run npm run watch again, so we can see here that we've got a very nasty looking Sass error, and it happens on line 441 of our file. So we'll go take a little look at line 441 all the way down here. And we can see that we've got this thing here saying add include assert ascending. And that this is not part of Sass. This is a custom mix-in that's part of Bootstrap. So what this error is telling us is that this file now has dependencies itself. It depends on files from Bootstrap to work. We've made it more complicated, and now it needs other files to run. So if we go and take a look at how the main Bootstrap file is structured, the first things they do is they import functions, then variables, maps, mixins, and utilities. So this is a good idea for us to do as well, to make sure that this is going to work. So we can basically put this up at the top, except that this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and this is wrong. The path is wrong because we only have this variables file available in our local project. So that is going to connect directly with our file, but these ones we need to connect with the Bootstrap version of the same file. And we already have the path here, so we can just do this, and this, and this, and this, and we should be good to go. So now, by adding these extra files, three below, one above the variables file, now we've enabled absolutely every feature. So we can customize anything we want inside Bootstrap now. There's no limitations. There's nothing that's going to break from that point. And this is a full-on customization arrangement here.